A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus told his disciples a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? No disciple is superior to the teacher, but when fully trained, every disciple will be like his teacher. Why do you notice the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the wooden beam in your own? How can you say to your brother, Brother, let me remove that splinter in your eye, when you do not notice the wooden beam in your own eye? You hypocrite! Remove the wooden beam from your eye first, then you will see clearly to remove the splinter in your brother's eye. A good tree does not bear rotten fruit, nor does a rotten tree bear good fruit. For every tree is known by its own fruit. For people do not pick figs from thorn bushes, nor do they gather grapes from brambles. A good person, out of the store of goodness in his heart, produces good, but an evil person, out of his store of evil, produces evil. For from the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. This weekend, we hear our third consecutive gospel reading from the 6th chapter of Luke. These successive weekends where it seems to be getting more and more difficult to be a disciple, to be a Christian, where Jesus is challenging all of us in difficult ways. It started a couple weeks ago with a message of hope, with the Beatitudes. Jesus gives us the Beatitudes. And they almost seem like oxymorons. They seem unattainable. That if you're weeping now, you will soon rejoice. And if you're hungry now, you will soon be satisfied. Almost automatically. But rather it offers us a message of hope that no matter what we're going through, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is joy. There is hope that we all need to hold on to. And then last weekend, the gospel got a little more difficult to live out. Where we hear about the golden rule, to do to others as we want to be done to us. And it was about forgiveness. Where we hear that we are called to be merciful just as your Father in heaven is merciful. And to be forgiving. And that's tough sometimes. Because Jesus is talking about this unconditional forgiveness. Even when they don't deserve it, even when you shouldn't give it to them, even in the worst of circumstances, we're still called to forgive. And that's the message Jesus gives to all of us. Because just as God forgives all of us, so we ought to forgive one another. That was the message last week. And another very difficult message to grasp. Another difficult pill to swallow. And then here we are again this weekend. Another difficult gospel reading. Talking about hypocrisy. And how easy it is for us to be hypocrites. How easy it is for us to put up a double standard. And how easy it is for us to be judgmental. But Jesus is warning all of us to avoid these lifestyles, to avoid these habits. And first, instead of judging, before we point out the little speck of wood, the splinter of wood in our brother or our sister, our neighbor's eye, we ought to acknowledge, hey, we got a gaping wooden beam in our own eye. Don't judge. Don't judge, and you will not be judged. It's essentially what Jesus is telling us in today's gospel reading. And why can't we judge? Because we need to acknowledge that we are all in this together. We're all here on a level playing field. As Job reminds us in his book in the Old Testament, naked I came forth from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. That is a wake-up call for all of us, because it's so true. We all come into this world in the same way, and we all leave this world in the same way. We're going to hear it on Wednesday. This Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. What are we going to hear when ashes are placed onto our heads? Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. We all come into this world in the same way, and we all leave this world in the same way. We're all equal. So stop passing judgment. No amount of riches or money or material goods or compliments or relationships, nothing can add up to anything. Nothing can amount to any good, because we are all destined for the same end. No matter how much we want to take with us, no matter how much we can judge other people for not preparing enough, or for not hoarding enough, or even ourselves, or whatever, it doesn't matter, because we are all destined for the same end after we live out this earthly pilgrimage here on earth. And the only thing that is different is whether we go up or down, essentially. The only thing that happens after this mortal body of ours is placed into the ground, after the soul and the body are separated, we know, we hear this in a beautiful preface at funerals and All Souls Day and Masses for the dead, that for your faithful people, Lord, life is changed but not ended. And when this earthly dwelling turns to dust, an everlasting inheritance is made ready for us in heaven. So what happens when we return to dust? What happens at the end of our life? Well, that's what we're living for here on earth, here and now. That's what we're preparing for. That's the only thing we should be preparing for. And that's the only circumstance in which we should be judging ourselves and others. Because who is the ultimate judge? Well, it's God himself. But we can guide others along the right path if we see them straying. If we see them going down the wrong way, following the path of evil, following the wide road that leads to destruction, rather on the narrow path. It's a difficult lifestyle. It's going against the current. We know that in our world, in our culture, it's becoming harder and harder to be a Christian, to be a Catholic. That's why even in Jesus' day, these Gospels, these quotes that he's giving to us, these messages, these ways and rules of life that he's giving to us, were as hard to grasp back then as they are for us nowadays. Because Jesus came with such a radical new way of living that's so contrary to the culture and so difficult to comprehend and to live, but it's the only way. And just as it was radical back then, it's radical for us now to live in this way, to live with faith, hope, and love, and forgiveness, and joy, and peace. And it's difficult. Jesus knew that when he was preaching this message. He says, this is the way. No one comes to the Father except through me. We have to live the way Christ lived. We have to live according to his dictates, to his teachings, and to his holy word. It's challenging. And that's why we need one another. We're all in this together, to guide others, to guide ourselves, to guide those we care about closer to Christ, closer to following this radical way of life. You know, the last code in the Code of Canon Law. Canon Law is a rule book, essentially, for our faith. Going through many different rules and outlining different ways that we have to live if we're going to be Catholics. The last code in the Code of Canon Law says it's the most important code. And that code says this, that in everything we do, in everything we say, in every action of ours, everything we do has to be done with this in mind, with our salvation and the salvation of others. There it is, the most important rule we can live by, according to canon law, is we have to do everything with salvation in mind. That's the goal of our faith, our salvation. So we have to look out for our own salvation and the salvation of others. And in so doing, if we can accomplish this, then in no way will we judge anyone unhealthily. Because the only judgments we will pass are, hey, let's go away from this lifestyle. Let's steer you back on the right path. But we also have to be cautious of how we portray that message, because we have to do so out of love, charitably. Like, we're not going to preach hellfire and damnation to these people. We're not going to scold them. We're not going to yell in their face. We're not going to slap them in the face. We're not going to bring them in so they have our trust and our confidence, and we just slap them in the face and we tell them, hey, you're doing wrong. You're going to hell. No. Rather, we ought to do so lovingly, charitably, and with the salvation of their soul in mind. And also acknowledging that, hey, I'm a sinner too. I'm imperfect. I commit sins all the time, every day. So I'm acknowledging the wooden beam in my own eye, but I want to help you, because maybe you haven't been able to see this little speck in your eye. Maybe you haven't been told by anyone. And maybe I'm the person who's supposed to tell you about this and get you right back on the right path. Because, hey, we're in this together. Let's get to heaven together. Now, here it's a wonderful, wonderful experience. That's the message of this gospel reading, is to avoid hypocrisy, to avoid double standards, to avoid judgment. And the best way we can do this is by acknowledging and realizing that, hey, we're all on an equal playing field. We all come into this world and we leave this world in the same way. Just as it says in the gospel reading, that every disciple will be like his teacher. We all have the same amount of knowledge, for the most part. Okay, at some point or another, we all have the same amount of knowledge. We're all in this together. We're all given roughly the same amount of time here on earth. We're given some experiences, and it's easy to fall into jealousy and judgment. But before we do that, we have to realize, hey, how blessed have I been? Or how imperfect am I before we judge? And that's what Jesus is trying to tell us here today. It's a very difficult concept to grasp, but not only that, it's extremely difficult to live out, because it's so contrary to our culture, where we're so quick to judge others. We're so quick to cancel others. We're so quick to point out the faults of others instead of telling them lovingly. Maybe even whatever happened to fraternal correction. And all of these easy ways to go about conflict resolution and getting someone right back on the right path without judging the person. We judge the act, we judge the sin, but not the sinner. And we tell that person, hey, I noticed this was happening, and for your own good, for your own salvation, I want to direct you to the right path. That's what we're called to do. As radical and as contrary to the culture as it is, that's the message Jesus has for each and every one of us today. Stop judging, stop condemning, stop being a hypocrite. Rather, do everything out of love. First acknowledging that, hey, I'm a sinner too. I'm imperfect. I'm mortal. I'm finite. And I'm on this journey together. I'm trying to figure this out. We're on this together. But hey, I want to see you get to heaven. I want to get to heaven. So let's do this together. That's the message of today's gospel reading for all of us. To achieve faith's goal, our salvation. In order to do so, we need to do everything we say, every way we act, every second of our lives. We need to do everything with our salvation and the salvation of others in mind. And when we do so, we'll be able to notice the splinter in our brother's eye. We'll be able to notice the wooden beam in our own eye. And we'll be able to get each other on the right path. Lovingly. That's the key. Doing it charitably, out of love. And not judging. Not condemning, not being a hypocrite. Not creating a double standard. But correcting and redirecting our brothers and sisters lovingly. And that's the message that Jesus has left for all of us to live every single day of our lives.